I'm very excited to be here with my teacher and friend and chavruta, Rabbi David Kasher. A lot to say about him, but I won't. I'll just tell you that you should pick up this new book, hot off the press, literally, Parsha Nut, 54 Journeys into the World of Torah Commentary. Mind-blowing Torah commentaries. And I highly recommend this book. And we're not going to talk about this book, but as you know, at Uri Tzedek, we care so much about rooting our social justice work in Torah. And David, the first thing I want to ask you is, do you think that justice is a value that is clearly articulated in the Torah?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think, first of all, I think that the whole book of Exodus, Sefer Shemot, you might say, is really guided by some principle of justice. That might be as a book the place where the value is really processed. I mean, first you just have the resistance to oppression, the movement from slavery to freedom, which you might call a justice movement. But then that's quickly followed by a revelation that's at the kind of foundation of our whole theology and religion. But it's a revelation that manifests in law, and most of those laws, even in the Ten Commandments, are already many of them we would think of justice laws, like not stealing. But then that's immediately followed by what they sometimes call the covenant code, the Parshat Mishpatim, which is like laws, but you might translate as principles of justice, and you get this whole code of just principles to organize a society around. That's Sefer Shemot, but I think probably you would say that the value is first articulated. Sefer Shemot is in a sense picking up on probably back in Bereshit, in Genesis, when Avram is famously arguing with God and telling God to save the cities of Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, and Avram makes this claim: Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Shouldn't the judge of all the earth do justice, mishpat? And so you have this sense that there's some standard called justice that Avram is able to make reference to, that is a principle, that is a guiding principle that we associate with God, that we even imagine God wanting to adhere to. And then Sefer Shemot is sort of picking up on that with a whole parsha named Mishpatim, again referencing that. But I want to say one other thing, which is that in reading through the Torah again and again, I've come to believe that yes, justice is a major principle in the Torah, but that you might say that the two, I mean, it's hard to say like what the top Jewish values are. Sometimes we use that word loosely, Jewish values, but I think you might say that maybe the two top Jewish values are justice on the one hand, and you really, as I said, see that in the book of Exodus, and then suddenly the book of Leviticus of Vayikra comes along, and it seems like the concern there is holiness, some different principle. So you can see in these two sections of the Torah, and then there's these two books, and they each have these major legal codes. And the legal code, the covenant code, or Parshat Mishpatim in the book of Exodus, is really clearly articulating justice as a value. By the time you get to Leviticus, to Vayikra, it seems like we're concerned with something else, with what's taking place in the Mikdash, with like the holy rites and rituals of the priests. But then you get in the middle of that book, Parshat Kedoshim, this new set of laws that begins famously, Kedoshim to you, you be holy because I am holy. So it seems like it's a different kind of law. It's like there are the justice laws, and then there are like the holiness laws, but they're acting in a kind of a parallel to one another. And actually, even in those holiness laws, pretty soon you find examples of what you would think of as, again, justice laws, like lo tignovu, or lo taseh avel b'mishpat. There's that word again. That's in the holiness code, but still we're speaking about justice. And by the time we get to the end of Leviticus, it's as if we've named these two values, justice and holiness, as maybe our top virtues that are in dialogue with one another.
So fascinating. So there's so many halachot. I don't even know how many mitzvot there are. I mean, yes, there's a project of Taryag mitzvot where people argue how to fit them into 613. But, of all these laws, these countless laws, hundreds of laws, would you say they all fit into these two categories? there are laws of the Torah that fit into the justice category and laws that fit into the holiness category?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always like dangerous to be absolute about categories in this sprawling tradition, but I think there is a case to be made. I mean, I just said maybe these are the top virtues in the Torah, and I think there is a case to be made that most of the laws, which are really just laws themselves, are just articulations of value principles, of ways of carrying out value principles in the world. And so the legal sections of the Torah are good places to look for values. And yeah, I mean, there's a classic binary that we use to think about Jewish law, the difference between chukim and mishpatim, the two different words for law, but that the Talmud in Yoma famously picks up and says, oh, chukim, those are the laws that, like, it's not clear what the reasons are for them. You just do them because, and I think it quotes actually Parsha Kedoshim, because I'm the Lord your God. You just do them because God said so. And then there are these other laws that, like, even if they hadn't been written, din hu sheyichtavu, they should be written. They're principles of reason that any human society would eventually come to. And I think you might say, if that's the classic binary in Jewish law, is the reasonable laws, and then the just like the spiritual, just because God said so laws, you might say that the reasonable laws are those principles of justice that the Torah incorporates, but that any society would naturally come to. Don't steal, don't kill. Whereas the holiness laws are those laws that we're just doing them because these are the ways, these are the mechanisms through which we engage with the Holy One, with the holy space, with those sort of trans-rational religious experiences. So maybe you could say there are the justice laws, and then there are the holiness laws.
And the mishpatim and chukim, that more or less also overlaps with the categories of mitzvot ben adam lechavero, mitzvot ben adam lemakom, right?
I think that's true. I think that's right. I mean, I think you might say that justice itself is a principle which implicates a human society. You speak of divine justice, like God carrying out principles of justice or acting within principles of justice, but it's still, even in that early conversation between Avram and God, it was about how God's justice would play out in human society. So I think you're right to say that those laws which we think of as taking place between people, those are laws where justice is really essential. Whereas the laws that solely negotiate my relationship with God, like keeping kosher, that's a holiness principle. But just like, I would again just take note that I said that in the holiness code there's mention of mishpat, and I think even in Parshat Mishpatim there's Vanshe Kodesh Tiyun. You should be holy people, and so you shouldn't eat treifot. You shouldn't eat the animals that have been torn up. So it's, I think these are nice ways to kind of place these two values in two different sections, but even in those sections, you can see they bleed together. And I think that the Torah wants them to be commingling, and the real vision of lots of traditions have justice, and maybe lots of traditions have holiness, but I really do think that the vision of the Torah is that we could integrate these two things, that we could carry out a kind of a holy justice or a just holiness in the world. And that's really the Jewish vision.
Good. So I want to get back to the integration, but I also appreciate the separation. And for example, the Pope said something this week around homosexuality, and he was looking to address decriminalization. There's societies that want to criminalize homosexuality based on religious principles. And he said, and he clarified what he said later, but he said, yes, I think sex out of marriage is a sin in Catholicism, right? But it is not, we cannot criminalize it, meaning it is not in a moral category. It's not a part of justice. It's a part of what we understand to be holy in Catholicism. And I think that separation is helpful a little bit as we think about societal policy as well. Just like I want to keep kosher, I don't want to legislate that in Israel or in America. Right. But in justice principles, I want to think about how we're going to extend that into society at large.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting example. And I think you might use this split between justice and holiness. It might be a useful way of thinking about about the laws that we have, and sometimes the way those like we are grappling with those laws. Like if you take, you know, prohibitions against like homosexual sex, for example, those appear in the kind of holiness sections of the Torah. And yes, maybe your sexual practices and purifying the body is related to some principle of holiness, and these mandates get articulated within the context of a striving for holiness. But I think that our current critique or frustration with these laws is actually grounded in principles of justice, that whatever holy principle they're trying to articulate, they end up causing real pain and suffering in human life. And when we think about justice, just like when Avram was thinking about the justice of Sodom and Amorah, when we think about justice, we think about how does this affect real human beings? What is the human cost here? And whereas holiness, it's something we can speak about in the kind of abstract spiritual realm. But again, I don't think the Torah and Jewish tradition ever wants us leaving ourselves entirely in that abstract spiritual realm. There's a way in which justice becomes a kind of a counter mechanism, a way of evaluate, is our holy life actually causing harm in the world and violating principles of justice? And then it has to be renegotiated. Beautiful. Right. And it's also true, by the way, that in our struggle for justice, yes, you know, the opposite is true. Like, is our human struggle for justice great and glorious, but forgetting that human beings need more than just fairness, equity, freedom from pain, rights, but actually need to be engaged with some transcendent principle. And let's not forget that either. Yes. So it's like back and forth and back and forth.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so just one last question for you. You brought up Shemot and Vayikra. You brought up Exodus and Leviticus. But there's another legal book in the Torah, Devarim, of Deuteronomy. And how do you see this playing out over there as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I mean, I do feel like Exodus is sort of clearly a justice book and that Leviticus is clearly a holiness book. I think following my logic, you would end up saying, well, by the time you get to that last book of the Torah, of Devarim, you know, the principles have been now articulated and are becoming integrated. I mean, Devarim really, and all the laws of Devarim are really about envisioning, okay, how is this going to work in a society, in a big sprawling society? Before, we've just been traveling through the desert, and we've been talking about the things that matter to us because ethically or, you know, but as a values principle, they matter. But we're just dealing with like limited interpersonal relationships. Devarim starts to imagine, what will this look like in a state, in a society? And so, of course, it's picking up on principles of justice and imagining court systems. And but I think by this point, holiness is also well articulated. We've now moved through the book of Vayikra as well. So the vision that Devarim gives is a full society that I think is guided chiefly by these two principles.
Beautiful. Friends, this only scratches the surface. I mean, hardly even scratches the surface, but we do hope you'll check out Parshanut, 54 Journeys into the World of Torah Commentator, one of the great educators and thinkers of our time, Rabbi David Kasher. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Millie.